Hi everyone, today let's talk about NVIDIA earnings, then we'll talk the Microsoft hack, then we'll go over the Fed minutes, then we'll go over Max Payne, then we'll get into the charts, then we'll get into my abysmal results, due mostly to the whipsaw that we've been seeing. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open as well as Sundays, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So NVIDIA crushed it, up 18%. They raised forward guidance, stronger than expectations on everything. You can see they also crushed on revenue as well as earnings per share. This was a 14% annualized increase versus expectations, so everything for them is going much higher. And we'll take a look at their charts later, but it looks ridiculous. Moving over to the Microsoft story, they said that they were attacked by Chinese hackers, potentially state-funded. They said state-funded, but you never know with hackers. They're fairly hard to trace. They say the group was Vault Typhoon and that they attacked critical infrastructure in the United States. This is concerning mainly because it's an escalation from China towards the United States. If tensions start to rise here, that could definitely be detrimental for the markets. Certainly not affecting the markets right now. This came out today and it didn't really do very much, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind. Moving over to the Fed minutes, there wasn't a lot new coming out of these Fed minutes. They talked about how they were unsure in the comments, and basically that was reiterated here. So basically no impacts on the markets. I looked at the Fed futures as well, and they were basically unchanged, slightly more towards a hike in June, but very, very similar to what they showed yesterday. Overall, it appears that they're moving towards that data-dependent approach, which they supposedly have been doing the whole time, but generally they've been hiking. And now they're waiting to see if we get bad data, they'll likely hike. And if it stays on this very slow trajectory, it seems like we're going to get the pause in June. Moving over to Max Payne for the Friday expiration, you can see Max Payne is still at 415. Lots of options in here now, about 200,000 more. Put call ratio still quite high at 2.29. Looking at 423 to the upside, really 420 still being that upside cap. We'll see how that plays out with the strong NVIDIA earnings, but looking for that close around 416 to 418 I think makes the most amount of sense. We'll see how that plays out. 422 is also interesting because it does expire all of these puts worthless here, but overall it still looks bullish because of this big skew of puts. Moving over to the economic calendar, there wasn't much today except for those FOMC minutes that we already talked about. Otherwise, looking at tomorrow here, we have GDP at 8:30 in the morning, jobless claims as usual, and then pending home sales at 10 o'clock. Moving over to earnings for tomorrow, the big player here is Costco. They don't usually move the markets too much. They're generally as expected. Do have Autodesk and Marvel here, Dollar Tree, fairly interesting, Ultra, Best Buy, not much. Costco's a fairly big company, but like I said, they don't usually move too much on earnings. Moving over to the charts, starting with the SPY here on the hour and the 12-hour. You can see we went down, tested support, then rallied here into the after hours based on those earnings. And this is fairly interesting here now. So we have lower lows. We're waiting to see if we get a lower high set up and a continuation. Maybe this turns into a longer term double top at these levels. That would be fairly interesting. Upside resistance at these previous highs is that 420 level that we talked about on Max Payne. If we're going to get up to that level, I'd be watching 414.69. Right now, we're still in this 410.54 to 414.69 range. And really, that's what I'm looking for. Looking at the 12-hour chart, you can see we're back into this range that we've been in for a while. Momentum is bearish still, which generally indicates this will probably be a shorter term pullback and then a continuation, maybe down to these previous lows at 405.29. But remember, we have all those puts in the market, and we do have to be cognizant of that. Moving over to the NASDAQ, you can see similar thesis, made lower lows as we expected, tested that 330 level, broke back above all of these levels on the NVIDIA earnings. Super hard to forecast this kind of a move, but at this point, we're getting back into these previous highs, and you have to assume that this is a continuation of the bull trend based on NVIDIA. Definitely interesting to see here. This is getting to be a little bit tougher to trade considering this downtrend. We thought we would get some kind of continuation based on this, which we did today, but then NVIDIA coming in and crashing the party and pushing the NASDAQ back up to its most recent highs. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow. They don't get to participate in the NVIDIA party, so they're basically sitting on their lows after a push down. You can see some dojis here on the 4-hour on the Russell. Tested that 76-ish area. If we see a pullback, maybe we're looking at a head and shoulders. If we push much higher, maybe we get higher high. That would be interesting. But right now we have negative momentum, bearish RSI, and you have to assume that we're just going to continue to trade in this range until we get some consistent movement one way or the other. It is worth noting we're still above the 200 SMA on the 4-hour chart, so theoretically this could push back up into these previous highs. But like I said, this down move is still quite bearish. Moving over to the Dow, you can see this big push lower sitting on its lows. Momentum did tick slightly bullish in the after hours. At this point, this is a lower low, breaking down below my 329.40 level, testing lower trend support. You could absolutely see a little bit of a bounce off of that trend, so be careful if you are trading this to the bear side. But at this point, this is still continuing to make lower lows and probably will continue to do so even if we get a pullback over the next day or two. Moving over to Apple, you can see we got below this level, got back above it, retested the 9 EMA, retested VWAP here. So now we're chopping sideways back in this previous range. 170.90 to the downside is my trigger for more selling. Momentum is starting to tick back towards bullish, which is interesting. RSI moving back towards that SMA, but still well below it and below the 50 line. So it certainly could continue to break down here. Overall, still neutral on Apple. Tesla, on the other hand, fell in the pre-market, tested the 200 SMA here, and then rallied pretty much throughout the day, and it's getting a boost off NVIDIA here after hours, so definitely a pretty interesting sympathy play there on Tesla. Moving over to Roku and Alphabet, you can see Roku retraced that entire down move, made new highs here today, getting a little bit of upside after hours. Everything looks bullish again on Roku. Google, on the other hand, looked pretty bearish throughout the day, but it's getting another AI sympathy play. AI has been pushing everything higher, and Google is one of the biggest names in that, so it continues to participate in these rallies. Momentum ticking toward bullish. RSI still above the 50 line, but below the SMA. RSI hasn't been super helpful here because this rally has been relentless, so do keep that in mind. Moving over to Snowflake and NVIDIA, you can see Snowflake falling off a cliff here on their earnings. Definitely not what you want to see. They're getting back into a previously traded zone. That's fairly interesting, though. You can see that little area of volume. Certainly could be an area where it decides to hold. But down here is their more traded volume area, down around 142. NVIDIA, on the other hand, you can see huge move, making all-time highs by a lot. We had it marked here at 345.99. Now it's all the way up at 374.38 on earnings, 22%, 22.5% or so on earnings. Everything here is bananas for NVIDIA. Moving over to staples and discretionary, staples continues to fall through the floor, broke 74, looking down to 72.50, looking to fill this gap down here as well around 73. Overall, super bearish, continues to go lower, volume is still quite high on this down move. Discretionary did gap down, did take out this first trend line, tested the lower trend as well as the 21 EMA, and then it ended up holding the 148.89 level, which is interesting. So now we've tested these trend lines off of this big move, and you have to expect that maybe we're starting to see another continuation back into these previous highs, looking for either a double top. That would be interesting. It is worth noting that momentum is still continuing down here today. And it is coming from a pretty strong momentum play. So if it does break down, then we're watching 174 or the 200 SMA at 145.94. But this wick to the downside at the 21 does indicate that there are some buyers, in my opinion. Moving over to oil and gas and energy, we've been talking about this for a while, still looks bullish, coming off of these lows, continuing higher here today. Oil and gas was up about 0.5%, energy up 0.44. Momentum and RSI on both of these looks pretty good right now. So still bullish, still watching both of these. Moving over to semiconductors, no big surprises here. This is going much higher very quickly. It's broken out above all these most recent levels, making new highs. So we have a level at 141.29. That's the highs going back to March of last year. That would be your next price target, in my opinion. So about another $5 of upside potential there. There's definitely some resistance in this previous consolidation, but look at this, just continuing higher, looking like 141 is the next target. Moving over to the transports here on the hour and the daily chart, you can see big gap down, huge move lower, testing support here on the hourly chart. Momentum is starting to pick up a little bit, which is interesting. You can see that big gap down here on the daily chart, RSI moving lower, Momentum also moving lower. At this point, I would expect this to come down to around 217 to 18 at this previous trend support. If that breaks down, then we're going to be moving much lower in my opinion. But overall, closing below this previous trend looks more bearish here on the daily chart. Still looking like a little bit of a hold on the hourly, but I would expect any kind of up move to be met with sellers on transports. Moving over to yields, you can see both of these continuing to go higher here. New high on the 2-year, 10-year, right at resistance once again, looking to get above that 3 3/4. If this does break, there might be a level around 3.9. That would be interesting, but really looking at these previous highs right around that 3.97 to 4 range, that would be interesting. Momentum and RSI on both of these is bullish. Moving over to breadth, this is pretty tough to deal with here. So breadth is falling through the floor, but markets are still holding up because of the big players like NVIDIA. So it's tough to play. Momentum, super bearish. RSI, super bearish. Broke down like we kind of thought that it was going to, just like we talked about yesterday. 200 following through as well. Momentum, RSI, both of these super bearish. And at this point, it's really tough because it seems like markets should sell off. There's very few stocks participating in the rally. And then you get NVIDIA coming in hot and pushing all the markets right back up. So definitely difficult to trade here in the short term. Moving over to the dollar here on the hour and the 12-hour, you can see we broke out above my level, just like we thought we were going to, pushing up to 104.4 now. You can see that on the hourly chart. We did get a push, rejection, continuation push. Now we're pulling back a little bit with some fading momentum, but I would expect any down moves to be bought up. Overall, still bullish here on the dollar. Moving over to JNK and TLT, you can see that big drop here on JNK, kind of like we expected to happen as well. This confirms the breadth move, but again, markets are still holding up. But we have further divergence, which is definitely not what you want to see. TLT, on the other hand, still holding in the zone, but you had a pretty bearish day with yields continuing to go higher here. Momentum still bearish, but moving neutrally, but basically the same as yesterday, despite the down day. RSI still very weak, moving lower here. But moving back to JNK, this is really what you would expect to see if markets were selling off through the floor. But we ended up seeing a base and a bit of a rally on NVIDIA earnings, so definitely interesting. Moving over to the bond and S&P's volatility index, you can see bonds still holding at resistance, which is interesting. If this starts to break out, that would be quite bearish for bonds. TLT is kind of sitting at that big zone of support. And if it breaks down from there, I think we would see this move much higher. Moving over to the VIX, you can see we got above my 20 level. We're now holding in that zone. This continues to look super bullish here on the VIX. Jumping out to the 1-day chart, you can see kind of where we're at above these previous highs in terms of the wick, but closed right at that level. If this continues higher here, I'll be watching for 2250 as a potential zone of resistance. But if this continues to break out, obviously that's going to spell some lower prices. And I don't think even NVIDIA can hold up the markets if this continues to go higher. Moving over to my accounts, you can see I got absolutely chopped up here today. Markets moved lower down to that 330 level like we talked about. And I kind of expected that level to break. I started putting some positions back on as we rallied and started readjusting, which did help me out a little bit, but I had already been chopped up fairly well by that point. And then now looking at this NASDAQ move up here, I'm going to be underwater on these 335 calls. All of these puts will be fine. That will be good. But I had some 333 and 334 calls for 2 days out. Definitely going to be in trouble on those positions. I mean, it's just really difficult to account for a big move like NVIDIA. So we'll see how this plays out tomorrow. Maybe we get a pullback and I get some opportunity to get out of these positions. But right now, you have to assume that NVIDIA is going to prop up the NASDAQ specifically, and that we might end up going higher. Let me know down in the comment section what you thought of NVIDIA earnings or the Fed minutes. Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.